right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep on something that at first seems super obvious,
hmm
but then when you start to think about it, you realize it's actually really complicated.
Okay, I like where this is going already.
So how much does it actually help us learn when the visuals we're using are really realistic?
Yeah.
Especially these days when everyone's talking about VR and AR, you'd think the closer to real life, the better.
I think that's definitely everyone's first thought, right? It just seems intuitive. Like, why wouldn't it be better?
Yeah, totally.
So, I mean, it's no surprise that everyone's going crazy for these ultra lifelike graphics.
Right.
But actually, looking at the research you sent me, and this is so cool, that intuition is not always right.
Mm.
And that's what this whole deep dive is about, right? It's like getting down into the nuts and bolts and figuring out when it actually does help. And maybe even more interesting, when it actually doesn't help to make things look super realistic.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there are times when you're trying to learn something and it's like those simple drawings or diagrams, they click. And they make you understand something in a way that a super detailed picture or a 3D model just doesn't.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird because it messes with that whole idea that seeing is believing, right?
Totally.
If we make it look real enough, you'll instantly understand it.
Well, it really challenges this concept of what's called naive realism.
Hmm.
And that's this idea that people have that our visual perception is just this like simple, accurate, completely objective recording of the world around us.
Like a camera.
Exactly, like a camera. And as we're going to get into, it's a lot more complicated than that. Our brains are doing so much work behind the scenes,
Right.
and that has big implications for how we learn from visuals. Huge.
So it's not like we're just going to say realism, good or bad today.
No.
It's so much more nuanced than that. We're going to break down all these different ways that realism can impact your learning, how you are learning from the visuals you see around you all the time. And we're going to be drawing on some really cool research, stuff that looks at the basic theories of visual learning, the nitty-gritty of how these visuals get made, and then, what it all means for how our brains take in new information.
And the sources you sent, this is great, by the way. They give us such a good overview.
Yeah.
They talk about the fundamental theories of visual learning, the technical stuff, the cognitive psychology stuff,
Right.
and then how it all applies to real-world teaching and learning,
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
right?
When we talk about realism in a visual, like, what are we actually talking about? I mean, I think our gut feeling is just like, how much does it look like the real thing?
Yeah, I think that's a good starting point, right?
Yeah.
Like, a realistic visual is trying to mimic what we'd see if we were looking at the actual object in the real world. Like, think about a photograph of a car, right? Now, compare that to what's called a schematic visualization, like a line drawing of a car.
Mm-hmm.
And often the purpose of a schematic visualization is to simplify, right? So you get rid of details that aren't essential for understanding.
Right, so you might just see the basic outline of the car.
Exactly, yeah, the basic shape and the layout. And, good examples of this would be like a detailed anatomical illustration
Yeah.
compared to like a simplified diagram showing how blood flows through the body.
Okay, I see. So we're talking about like a spectrum here,
Uh-huh.
from like the really basic stripped down stuff to super realistic, almost photorealistic.
Yeah. And actually, early research on this, such as like Dwyer's work on learning about the human heart, use this idea of a realism continuum.
Mm-hmm.
So you can compare how well people learn when they use no visuals at all.
Okay.
And then simple drawings, more detailed drawings, and then like actual photographs.
Oh.
And the idea was to see, is there like a direct link? Does learning just get better and better as the image gets more and more realistic?
So not real, kind of real, super real.
Right. But one of the problems with this like one-dimensional view, right,
Yeah.
is that it can be hard to compare these different points along the spectrum if you're not also controlling for how much information is being presented.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Because like a very detailed drawing might just have more information in it
Yeah,
than a simple one, regardless of how realistic it looks.
exactly.
Yeah.
And especially now, right, with all these
Yeah.
crazy 3D modeling tools,
Yeah.
creating visuals has become way more intricate. It's not just about adding or subtracting details. It's like we have all these different levers we can pull now.
Oh, so it's not just one slider that goes from like
Yeah.
simple to complex.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where this like really interesting model comes in. It's called the GSR model.
GSR.
Yeah, it stands for geometry, shading, and rendering. And it breaks down this whole idea of realism into these three separate independent dimensions.
Okay, cool. So tell me about geometry first. What is that?
All right, so geometry refers to the actual shape of the object and also the level of detail in that 3D model. So you can imagine it ranging from really, really basic shapes like a sphere, a cube, a cone,
Mm-hmm.
all the way to these like super high resolution 3D scans of a real object.
Oh, wow.
Right. And here's something that might surprise you. Sometimes having less geometric detail actually makes it easier for us to process the information.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have like a model that's just covered in all these little bumps and grooves and details that aren't really important,
Yeah.
that can actually increase our cognitive load.
Now, you said that before. Cognitive load. What does that mean again?
Yeah, so cognitive load is basically the amount of mental effort your brain has to use to understand something new.
Okay.
So if a visual has all this extra detail that's not really relevant, it's like your brain is wasting energy on all that instead of focusing on what actually matters.
So sometimes it's almost like a simple shape cuts through all the visual noise.
Yeah, exactly. And helps us focus on like the underlying form.
Okay, I see.
So more detail isn't always better.
Yeah.
Sometimes simplicity wins.
So that's geometry. What about shading?
Yeah, so shading is all about like the surface properties of the object.
Okay.
So its color, its texture, whether it's rough or smooth,
Yeah.
how shiny it is, glossy or matte, and even how transparent it is.
Okay.
And this is really interesting because this is where, even if you have a pretty simple geometric form, you can start to make it look really realistic just by adding textures.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Like if you took a basic sphere and put a a realistic basketball texture on it.
Yeah, exactly. Or like imagine like an egg shape.
Uh-huh.
If you add like a bird egg texture to it,
Yeah.
boom, it suddenly looks way more real, right?
Totally. Yeah. So texture is like a shortcut to realism.
Yeah, but just like with geometry, right?
Yeah.
If you go overboard with all these crazy complex shading details, you can also increase cognitive load.
Okay.
But there's some interesting research here about color specifically.
Oh, okay.
So one study found that using colored textures actually helps people differentiate between different parts of an object better.
Oh.
And this actually seemed to compensate for any extra cognitive load from the detailed shading.
Wow, that's so interesting because you think about color and you just think about it aesthetically,
Right.
but it's actually functional.
Exactly. It can really change how we understand something.
Okay, so geometry and shading. What about the last one? Rendering.
Yeah, so what do you think rendering is all about?
I'm guessing it's like the final step where you actually create the image. Like you set up the lighting,
uh-huh.
you set up the camera angle, you're creating a virtual scene.
You got it. You nailed it. So realistic rendering, the goal is to mimic how light would behave in real life.
Uh-huh.
So how it bounces off different surfaces, how shadows are cast, and all these subtle variations in light and dark.
Right.
But there are also non-realistic rendering styles.
Oh, okay.
Like think about toon shading, which you see in like cartoons or comics.
Oh, yeah.
And that really simplifies the light and shadow. Often, it even adds like bold outlines to the objects.
So it makes things look kind of like hand-drawn.
Exactly. Now, here's the thing. One challenge for researchers is that when you change the rendering style, you often also end up changing the shading at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Right? Like if you go from a realistic rendering with all these detailed textures to a toon-shaded look, you usually lose those textures.
Yeah, it's just flat colors then.
Exactly. And there have been studies that compare like fully 3D renderings to 2D versions. But the findings on how that impacts things like memory and comprehension, they've been kind of all over the place.
So it's hard to know what's really causing the changes in learning.
Right, because multiple things are changing at once.
Exactly.
And that's why this GSR model is so useful, right? It emphasizes that we need to look at each dimension separately, not just lump everything together as realistic or schematic.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like if one study is comparing like a grainy video to a line drawing,
Right.
and another one's comparing a shaded drawing to a black and white outline,
Yeah.
they're kind of using those terms in totally different ways.
Totally different ways. And then how do you compare the results?
Exactly.
You can't really.
So the GSR model gives us a much more precise vocabulary.
Exactly. It's like instead of just saying colors, now we can talk about specific shades of blue or red.
I like that. That's a good analogy. Okay, so we have this framework for understanding what we mean by realism.
Uh-huh.
Now, let's talk about how our brains learn. Like, What do the learning theories tell us about how realism might be affecting us? And I know you mentioned like cognitive load theory earlier.
Yes, definitely. Cognitive load theory, CLT, super important here.
Okay.
The basic idea is that our working memory, which is like the part of our brain that holds information,
Mm-hmm.
while we're actively thinking about it, it has a limited capacity. So CLT distinguishes between intrinsic cognitive load, which is the mental effort you need just to understand the core concept itself.
Okay.
And then there's extraneous cognitive load.
Uh-huh.
And that's any mental effort that doesn't really help you learn.
Oh, so it's like extra mental clutter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can actually get in the way of learning.
Interesting.
So from a CLT perspective, there's this idea that realism could actually be adding extraneous cognitive load
Okay.
because you're being presented with all this extra visual complexity that you don't really need,
Mm.
right? Like if an image has all this detail that not essential for understanding the main idea,
Right.
it's like your brain is trying to process all that superficial stuff instead of focusing on the important information.
So it's like that example we were talking about before with like too much detail in the geometry or the shading.
Exactly, exactly. And then you also brought up this idea of naive realism.
Yeah, which is a totally different way of looking at this.
Totally. And it suggests that people might have this preference for realistic visuals
Uh-huh.
because they have these kind of like misconceptions about how their own visual system works.
Right, yeah. Like we think we're seeing everything perfectly.
Exactly. They think seeing is just this like simple, direct, totally accurate process. Like our eyes are just cameras recording everything perfectly.
Right.
But that's not really how it works.
No, it's not.
And, think about change blindness.
Oh, yeah, right?
Have you ever seen those videos where like something really obvious changes in the scene
Yeah.
and you totally miss it?
Yeah, totally miss it. It's so weird.
It's crazy. It shows how our brains can be fooled so easily.
Yeah.
So this idea of naive realism warns us that we shouldn't just assume that because something uses all this high-tech stuff to look super realistic,
Mm.
that it's automatically going to make us learn better.
Yeah.
People might be drawn to it.
Because it looks cool.
Yeah, exactly, because they think, oh, this is so accurate, but that might not actually translate into better learning.
Yeah, it's like we inherently trust the realistic stuff.
Yeah.
Even if it's not actually helping us.
Even if it's making it harder.
Okay, so we've got this idea of cognitive load,
Okay.
which is basically like you can overload your working memory with too much realism,
Uh-huh.
and then this idea of naive realism,
Right.
that we might be biased to think more realistic is always better. But how does all of this play out when we actually look at how people learn from these visuals?
Right. Well, that's where we have this really cool cognitive model of learning with realistic visualizations.
Okay.
And it proposes 3 main stages: perception, schema construction, and testing.
Okay.
And one thing to keep in mind is that these stages aren't always linear. You might jump back and forth between them.
Okay, so tell me about perception. What happens when we first encounter a realistic visual?
All right. So in the perception stage, the learner's basically trying to take in all the visual information
Mm-hmm.
and build this kind of like first draft, this initial 3D mental representation. And there was some research by Bernie and colleagues that actually broke this down into these sub-processes.
Oh.
Like identifying the basic shapes, remembering different views of the object, and then like mentally stitching those together into a 3D model.
So there's a lot going on in that first
A
stage.
lot of cognitive work, yeah.
One of the theories is that our brains actually use this kind of set of basic geometric shapes, often called genes, as building blocks to represent objects.
Uh-huh.
So the idea is that if you add more and more realism through geometry, shading, rendering,
Yeah.
it can actually make it harder to break down that complex object into those simple genes.
Oh, that makes sense.
You know, more intricate geometry, more shapes to identify, to hold in your working memory.
Uh-huh.
And then, complex shading with all those different colors and textures could make it harder to see those basic shapes.
Yeah.
So it's like, even though those realistic details make it look more like the real thing,
Yeah.
it could actually complicate that very first step of just figuring out the basic form.
Yeah, totally. And that's what we call perceptual load,
Oh, okay.
right? That's the demand placed on our visual processing system
Yeah.
by these like complex shapes, materials, and realistic rendering. And that might actually distract us
Yeah.
from the most important information. Think about that patella example, right?
The knee bone.
Yeah, the one with all the ridges and bumps.
Yeah.
That's got way more individual elements that your brain has to process
Uh-huh.
than if it was like a smoother, simplified model.
Okay, I see. So what can you do to reduce that perceptual load? Like if you're using realistic visuals, are there strategies?
Yeah, there are. One really important technique is called signaling,
Signaling. Okay.
and it's basically using visual cues to highlight the important parts
Mm-hmm.
or the relationships within the visual.
So you could use like color to draw attention to a specific area.
Exactly, yeah. Or you could match the colors in the visual with the colors used in the text.
Oh, smart.
Research shows that this is especially helpful for learners who are new to a topic because it's kind of like guiding their attention to the right spot.
It's like you're highlighting the key features.
Exactly, exactly. And what's really interesting is that realism itself can sometimes act as a signal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so like there was this study on learning routes in a virtual environment,
Uh-huh.
and people actually learned the route better when the key landmarks were rendered with high realism.
Oh, okay.
But the surrounding buildings were more abstract, so the contrast actually drew their attention.
Interesting. So it's not just about making everything realistic, it's about being selective with the realism.
Exactly. And there's this other cool study with anatomy learning where a specific part of a knee joint was shown in high realism,
Mm-hmm.
but the rest of the joint was more schematic.
Oh, okay.
And people were better at remembering the part that was shown realistically.
Wow. So that really shows you how powerful it can be.
Yeah. So basically, strategically using realism can focus attention where it needs to go.
So you're not overwhelming them with detail everywhere. You're choosing where you want to draw the eye.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so perception is all about taking in the visual information. We talked about how realism can sometimes add to perceptual load,
Uh-huh.
but signaling can help. And we even talked about how realism itself can be a form of signaling.
Yeah.
Now, what about that next step? Schema construction.
Right. So in schema construction, the learner is taking that initial mental representation
Uh-huh.
and they're trying to build a more lasting, stable mental framework in their long-term memory. Call it a schema,
Okay.
right? So it's about connecting what they've seen to other information like text, audio, or their existing knowledge.
So they're integrating it into what they already know.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about making sense of it.
Now, how do those GSR components fit into all of this?
Okay, so the GSR components can actually contribute to what's called element interactivity.
Element interactivity, okay.
Right, so realistic visuals tend to have more of these interacting elements.
Uh-huh.
Think about like the fine details of a texture, the way light reflects off different materials,
Okay.
slight variations in shape.
Right.
So learners need the mental capacity to process not just each of those elements individually,
Uh-huh.
but also how they relate to each other.
Oh, that's a good point.
Well-
So it's not just the individual pieces, it's how they fit together.
Exactly. And that can add to cognitive load.
Yeah, because now you have, like, relationships to process.
Totally. And this is where individual differences in learners, especially spatial ability, become really important.
Okay.
So there's been quite a bit of research showing that people with higher spatial ability,
Uh-huh.
they tend to benefit more from realistic 3D models and real-life footage.
Okay.
They seem to be better at handling that extra visual complexity.
So what about those of us who aren't, like, naturally great at visualizing things?
Well, it's interesting because this research shows that people with lower spatial ability
Yeah.
often do better with simpler, more schematic visuals.
Mm.
Yeah. And for them, all those detailed, realistic visuals can actually be overwhelming.
Interesting.
And it can hurt their ability to build a good mental schema.
So that challenges that whole naive realism idea.
Exactly, yeah. It's not always better to be more realistic.
Yeah, because a super detailed 3D model might be amazing for somebody who's like a visual thinker,
Right,
but it might just confuse the heck out of somebody who's not.
exactly. It's about understanding how different people learn.
Yeah, totally.
We also have this thing called the expertise reversal effect,
Okay.
which basically means that if you already know a lot about a topic,
Uh-huh.
those super detailed materials might actually make you do worse because they're presenting a bunch of stuff you already know.
Oh, so it becomes like extra noise.
Exactly. It becomes extraneous load.
Interesting.
And then finally, I thought this was so cool.
Yeah.
The type of visualization you learn with can actually change how you observe things in the real world later on.
Wow, that's wild.
So cool.
So perception is taking the visual information in.
Yeah.
Schema construction is about organizing it in your mind and storing it.
Right.
What about that last step? Testing.
Okay. So in the testing stage, this is where we figure out what the learner has actually learned, right?
Yeah.
And it turns out that the type of test you use can have a huge impact on whether those realistic or schematic visuals seem more effective.
So how does that work?
Well, if the test is all about detailed visual knowledge,
Uh-huh.
like recognizing specific features, like in Dwyer's anatomy studies where people had to point out different parts of the heart,
Okay.
then having learned with those realistic visuals,
Mhm.
with all the details, can be a big advantage.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right, because you've built this very concrete mental representation.
Uh-huh.
That's helpful for recognition.
So if you need to be able to pick something out,
Yeah,
the realistic visuals help you do that.
exactly. But on the other hand, those schematic visuals, the simpler ones,
Mhm.
they can actually be better for tasks that require you to, like, transform the knowledge
Oh,
or
okay.
apply it in a new situation.
So like problem solving.
Yeah, like there was this study where people had to imagine how a bug would change its shape through different life stages.
Huh?
And the people who had learned with those realistic depictions actually had a harder time
Really?
mentally manipulating that image in their mind
Interesting.
because they had this very detailed, fixed picture.
Oh, so it's almost like it makes it harder to be flexible.
Exactly.
If you've got this like super detailed image,
Right?
it's harder to change it around in your mind.
Yeah, exactly. Then there's this idea of realism acting as a retrieval cue.
Retrieval cue.
Yeah, so one study found that the surface details in a realistic visualization actually help people remember the information better later on.
Okay.
It's like that those details act as these little reminders.
So maybe you wouldn't remember the exact shape of the thing,
Uh-huh.
but you would remember the texture. And that would help you pull it out of your memory.
Exactly, exactly. But it's important to remember that this study just looked at memory.
Right.
We need more research to know if it also helps you use that knowledge in new ways.
So realistic details might help you remember what you saw,
Right.
but maybe not apply it to a new situation.
Exactly. And going back to GSR,
Uh-huh.
it seems like geometry and shading are probably the key dimensions for realism to act as a retrieval cue,
Okay.
because those are the things that contribute to those really specific details.
Right.
So, big takeaway here. Realistic visuals lead to more concrete, detailed mental pictures,
Uh-huh.
but schematic visuals lead to more flexible, adaptable ones.
And neither one is always better. It just depends on what you need to do with the information.
Exactly. It's all about the learning goal.
Okay, so we've talked about perception, schema construction, testing,
Bye.
all these core cognitive processes. But what are some of the broader implications of using realism? Especially now with these new technologies like virtual reality becoming more common,
Yeah, that's a really important question.
because they have the potential to change everything about how we learn.
Totally.
So one of the big things with VR, those headsets,
Uh-huh.
they use stereoscopic displays, which basically means they're showing a slightly different image to each eye,
Right.
just like in real life.
Yeah,
So you get this much stronger sense of depth.
totally. Yeah.
And research has shown that this can be really helpful for understanding complex 3D stuff.
Yeah?
You know, figuring out spatial relationships, recognizing details.
Yeah.
So for anything that's inherently three-dimensional,
Right.
VR could be a huge game changer for how we learn about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So think about, like, learning about molecules
Oh, yeah.
or, like, complex machinery.
Yeah,
Things that are hard to grasp on a flat screen.
exactly.
There's also this really cool theory that stereoscopy might actually reduce extraneous cognitive load
Oh, okay.
because it makes it easier for our brains to build that 3D
Yeah,
mental model.
right.
So maybe you don't have to work as hard.
Interesting. So it's not just about the feeling of immersion, it's about how your brain processes the information.
Exactly. And then on top of all that, we have the emotional and perceptual effects of realism in VR.
Okay.
So studies have shown that more realism in a VR environment can actually increase that feeling of presence.
Presence.
Yeah, that sensation that you're actually there in the environment.
Okay.
And they've even found that in VR tasks where you have to do physical things.
Uh-huh.
A more realistic environment can actually trigger bodily responses
Really?
that are similar to what you'd experience in the real world.
So, like, if you're in a really scary VR environment,
Uh-huh.
your heart rate might go up.
Yeah, exactly. Or, if you're in a virtual, like, yoga class,
Uh-huh.
your muscles might tense up in the same way that they would if you were in a real yoga studio.
Wow, that's so cool. It really shows the power of realism.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And then we also have this whole issue of credibility.
Okay.
So how believable does the learning content seem?
Right.
And generally, realistic visuals are seen as more credible.
Yeah,
than schematic ones.
that makes sense. It's like if it looks real,
Yeah,
you're more likely to believe it.
exactly. And, this ties into that naive realism thing,
Right.
but it can be really important in education,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're trying to teach people about something where the actual appearance is really important.
Yeah, totally. So, like, if you were teaching about a virus,
Right.
you'd want to show them a realistic image.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And good shading and rendering seem to be really key for that credibility factor.
So, realism doesn't just help with understanding,
Uh-huh.
it also helps with believing.
Yeah, exactly. But we do need to be careful, right?
Yeah.
Because there's always a potential downside.
Right.
Like maybe it influences our judgments in ways that we're not even aware of.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Or maybe it makes us overconfident in our understanding.
Right. Like, we think we get it just because it looks realistic.
Exactly.